All right, we're going to look at section or page 103 to 106 in your guided workbook. So it's talking about the logic and some of the statements that you can use in Excel to implement logic or decision making. So the first one that we're going to talk about is an if statement. So an if statement in Excel will look like this. It'll say if, and then you have your test, what you're trying to check for. And this was the part after the comma is what's going to happen if it's true, and the part after the second comma is what's going to happen if it's false. So we have an example here. It says if B2 is less than 100, $7.99, 0. So this is what's going to happen if it's true, and this is what's going to happen if it's false. So if the value in B2 is less than 100, then it's going to put $7.99 in this box. If the value is not less than 100, then it's going to put 0 in this box. So in this case, it would put $7.99. It would put 0 in this box because it is not less than 100. All right, so here's another example. What function would you type in if shipping is 10% of the order for orders less than 100 and 5% for all other orders? So in this case, if the value in B2 is less than 100, then you're going to take B2 times 10% because that's going to be your cost of shipping. Otherwise, you're going to do B2 times 5% because that's your cost of shipping. So let's look at another one. So in this next example, we can talk about what they call nesting two if statements or if statements together, and that's when you put if statements one inside of another. So in this case, this is your condition, this is your logical statement, this is what's going to happen if it's true, and this part's what's going to happen if it's false. So in this case, if the value of B is less than 100, then it's going to give you 10% of your shipping. Otherwise, it's going to check to see if B is less than 250. And if it's less than 250, then it's going to cost 5%. And if it's not less than 100 and it's not less than 250, then it's going to charge you nothing. Okay? All right, here's another example. So this is what we call a VLOOKUP. So VLOOKUP, what they will do is you will set up a table, and in this table, it basically will look at what the values in this column are to decide what output you should have. So you can set this up a little bit differently, so we'll look at some different examples. But you'll notice that the values in the cutoff column are always the left values in your limit. So from $0 to $99, you put 0 here. 100 to 249, we put 100. 250 to 499, we put 250. And then we can do our VLOOKUP problems. So here's our first example. It says VLOOKUP 65, we're looking at B3 through C7, and we're looking at column 2. Let's go back to our table. So B3 through C7 means we're looking at all of this grade part here. We're looking for 65. So 65, 100 is too big. So that means it's going to come back to this level, and 65 is going to be in column row 3. So it would come up with what we're looking for here. It would come up with 10%. So what if I typed VLOOKUP 650 B3 to C7, but I'm looking at column 1 this time. So this is what happens here. It goes through and finds 650. Well, 650 is too big for 1,000, so it backs up here. So instead of taking the 2.5%, it takes the 500 because it takes whatever is in column 1 in this case. If I changed this number to a 2, then my answer would be the 2.5%. Okay, now in this next one, they sort of tried to trick us a little bit. They said VLOOKUP, but they said B3 to C6. So we're not looking all the way down to the C7 to the 1000 and the 0%. So it's only going to go to the 6th row. So the $500 is already on the lower end of the 650, so it takes that 2.5%. All right. So the next function is what we call a random function, and the random function in Excel generates a random number between 0 and 1. So that means you're only going to have decimal values. So you're going to have like 0.1, 0.2, 0.5, 0.9, 0.999, but you'll never have values of 0 and you'll never have values of 1. So in this case, it's generating a random number. Now the parentheses are required because this is sort of what we call a function in a function in Excel. So it requires that you have those parentheses there. So this is saying generate a random number, and if that random number is less than 0.5, it's going to give us heads. Otherwise, it's going to give us tails. So if I randomly generate a number, there is a 50-50 chance that it will be less than 0.5. So this gives us a true probability and so if it works correctly, then 50% of the time I should get heads and 50% of the time I get tails. So ideally, if I rolled if I ran this program 100 times, I should get 50 heads and 50 tails. All right. So what if I wanted to make it so that it wasn't correctly generated, or it's an unfair coin, so to speak? Well, what if it was 75% of the time it was going to be heads? So now I'm going to do my random statement, but I'm going to say if the random generator is less than 0.75, then it gives me heads, otherwise it gives me tails. All right, so this next one says, what if I wanted to do 1/3 of the time it's going to give me a 1, and 1/3 of the time it's going to give me a 2, and 1/3 of the time it's going to give me a 3. So let's pretend I have in cell A1 the random generator. So I'm going to use A1 as my comparison just to make it look easier. So if the number that's randomly generated is less than 1/3, so it's 0.333 or less, then it's going to give me a 1. Otherwise, it's going to check to see if the number that was randomly generated is less than 2/3, which is 0.6. If it is, it's going to give me a 2. Otherwise, it's going to give me a 3. Now, I can't put this random statement right here, because as soon as the computer hits the random statement, it randomly generates a number. So I can only randomly generate it one time, and then I have to use this to do my comparison. So this statement here might go in cell A2 or A3 or some other cell in the spreadsheet. All right, our last example here, it says create a spreadsheet that simulates the rolling of a die using VLOOKUP and the random generator function, and write down all the formulas in B3 through C8 and then also in C10. So if I'm rolling a die, that means that there are 6 different faces of the die. So that means I have to take the numbers from 0 to 1 and divide it into sixths. So I have 0, 6 for 0, 1, 6, 2, 6, 3, 6, 4, 6, and 5, 6. Because remember, this value here is the lower end of the scale. So I don't want to go 1, 6, 2, 6, 3, 6, 4, 6, 5, 6, 6, 6. I want to make sure I start with the lower end of the scale. So the lower end of the scale is going from 0 to 0.5 all the way up to 5, 6. And if I have the lower end of the scale as 0, then that means I rolled a 1. If it was 1/6, then that means I rolled a 2, and it would go all the way up. So my VLOOKUP would say, generate a random number and check the values from B3 to C8 and look in column 2 to get my solution. So depending on what my random number is, if it's between 0, 6, and 1, 6, or 1, 6, and 2, 6, it's going to come up with this value. 1 through 6 is my random answer. I hope this helps.